Ms. Leslie, seconded by Ms. Quash, moves that this House A agree with many Canadians and the International Energy Agency that there is grave concern with the impacts of a 2 degrees rise in global average temperatures. B, dénonce.
B, condemn the lack of effective action by successive federal governments since 1998 to address emissions and meet our Kyoto commitments.
Call on the government to immediately table its federal climate change adoption plan. Debate. The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for reading out our motion, because I think the wording is really important. That's why we're here. We are here to reaffirm our commitment to the struggle against climate change, as well as reaffirm our commitment and belief and support of the science that supports that struggle. But why today? Why would we actually debate this today? Well, we're here today on the issue of climate change because the Minister of Natural Resources commented publicly last week in La Presse that he doesn't believe that people are worried about these changes to the planet. And when challenged on this, you know what he did? He doubled down on his claims, despite zero evidence to the contrary. Mr. Speaker, it's so bad that the U.S. newspaper headlines today are actually calling this minister the Minister of Oil for Canada. And this minister has been defended remarkably by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Environment. He's been applauded by the climate change deniers in his caucus, who think nothing of the risk to our planet and the burden that their willful blindness will leave to future generations. Now, according to the National Roundtable on Energy, Environment and the Economy, a roundtable that the Conservatives have axed, but according to them, the world has seen an increase in surface temperature of 0.78 degrees since the mid-19th century. And in the last 60 years, Canada's already seen a massive 1.3 degree change. So what does this mean? Well, the 2-degree threshold is a dangerous tipping point for irreversible, catastrophic climate change. That's what happens if we see 2 degrees of warming. The Minister of Natural Resources keeps quoting the International Energy Agency, and when he quotes the IEA and he quotes this scenario, he is actually quoting a 6 degree of warming. What does that mean? Well, the 6 degree scenario, as set out by the International Energy Agency, well, that takes the planet beyond any reasonable expectation of survival. And that's the scenario that this minister is quoting. In addition, he doesn't actually think that there's anything to worry about here. Well, I disagree with him, Mr. Speaker, and my colleague from Beauharnois-Salaberry also disagrees, and I would love to be able to share my time with her so that she can point out the fallacy in the minister's logic here. During this debate, Mr. Speaker, you should prepare yourself for an onslaught of greenwashing from the other side, from the government side today. They are going to take credit for the success of provincial emissions reductions. They're going to celebrate the fact that they are on track to miss their climate change targets by 50%. They're going to miss them, and these targets are actually woefully inadequate. They're going to claim that they're responsible for stabilizing emissions in Canada, but they are contradicted by the most recent annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory that was released earlier this month. They're going to ignore the fact that they foolishly canceled the wildly successful EcoEnergy home retrofit program, despite the incredible promise that this program held for long-term job creation, for reductions in emissions, and really for making life more affordable for all Canadians. I guess that program was just a little too successful for them, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives will also allege that they understand and prioritize sustainable development, even though they have gutted environmental assessments in this country, so that 99% of assessments will no longer happen. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. They have decimated the protections of our fisheries. We no longer protect fish habitat in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And this is fish habitat that are worth, our fisheries are worth multiple billions of dollars a year. They have eradicated protections for our lakes and our rivers, jeopardizing the livelihoods and recreation and First Nations traditions of Canadians across the country.
The Conservatives' record on climate change is catastrophic. They have embarrassed Canada time and time again on the global stage by creating confusion in negotiations on climate change, by withdrawing from the Kyoto Protocol, which no other country has done, and by withdrawing from the United Nations Convention on Desertification, another international first. They cut deeply into research programs that were recognized and used around the world on the ozone and on fresh water. We have become the pariahs of negotiations on climate change in the world. The Conservatives have reduced the Canadian emission targets by 90% since they came to power in 2006. The least we can say is that they don't have any will to combat climate change. They ignore the fact that climate change doesn't have any borders, that this is a global problem, and that it will have repercussions on the health of all human beings and on national food security for all countries. They are acting irresponsibly by letting Canada fall behind in terms of diplomacy and commercial and economical development. The delay in this transition towards a more green economy in Canada makes us less competitive in the world. We're not taking advantage of new markets that new green technologies would represent, whether it's in manufacturing, in research, in innovation, or in trade.
Taken the inefficient and ineffective sector-by-sector regulatory approach to emissions regulations. Although they are grossly delayed at the same time in actually regulating sectors like the oil and gas sector. This is the fastest source of emissions right now. It's the fastest, it's the sector that is growing the fastest in Canada. And keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservatives promised those regulations on oil and gas. They said they would actually be in place in December 2009. It's 2013, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives claim that their approach to emissions reductions isn't costing Canadians. Well, we all know that's ridiculous because the cost of regulations is always carried on to the consumer. The issue is that the Conservatives refuse to be upfront about the costs of their sector-by-sector approach on Canadians, as well as the cost of their delay to regulate and the cost of their unambitious emissions targets. It is cheaper to tackle climate change than it is to just allow it to happen. The National Roundtable on Environment and Economy predicts that the cost of climate change in Canada alone will be $5 billion per year by 2020. 2020 is the same year that we're missing those inadequate targets by 50%. They also predict that this will cost us as much as $43 billion a year by 2050. We have to act, Mr. Speaker. Today, we're calling on the government to table its climate change plan. That's all we want. We want to see what their plan is. I don't have a high expectation that they will, despite the fact that the government committed in 2007 to develop this kind of a policy framework, and despite the fact that they actually agreed with the 2010 recommendations of the Environment Commissioner's Fall Report. They have failed. And for good reason. In Chapter 3 of his report, the Environment Commissioner wrote, with respect to the need for adaptation measures in Canada, he wrote, "Government reports have demonstrated that climate change affects all regions of the country and a wide range of economic sectors. These impacts and the need to adapt them touch on virtually all federal government portfolios, with significant implications for the policies and programs related to Canadians' health and the country's industry, infrastructure, and ecosystems. The health of Canadians and Canada's natural environment, communities, and economy are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Some of these impacts are already occurring from coast to coast. They are most evident in Canada's north, where, for example, the thawing of permafrost as a result of temperature increases is affecting the stability of roads, buildings, pipelines, and other infrastructure. And yet, the Minister of Natural Resources thinks that we are radicals for wanting to talk about climate change and the cost of environmental degradation. Well, I think we are radically practical, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the day, you'll actually hear the NDP plan to address climate change, because we do have a plan that includes a price on carbon. It includes adopting our Climate Change Accountability Act. And you'll hear from members of my caucus talk about these measures that the NDP supports. It's only the NDP that can be trusted to tackle climate change, Mr. Speaker. because it is at the core of who we are as social democrats. And I am proud to stand here today with my colleagues to reaffirm that commitment, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Well, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask my honourable colleague from Halifax, in the motion, why ask the government to only deal with the adaptation plan? Why not a mitigation program in order to mitigate the effects of climate change?
He included asking for the government's plan for adaptation. Are we giving up? I don't think we should be. Shouldn't we be asking for their mitigation plans to minimize the effects of climate change?
The honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. It's a legitimate question, absolutely. I don't think that any of us on this side of the House have given up. Unfortunately, I do think on the other side they've given up. To answer his question directly, I sit on the Environment Committee. I sit on panels where we debate the environment, on television, on radio, and I sit here in the House and ask questions about climate. And I am so sick of the Conservatives saying our sector-by-sector approach is working, as they list all of these reasons why it's working that they actually can't take credit for, like the fact that it's the provinces who are actually reducing our emissions, like the fact that we had a recession which accounts for some of our emissions reductions. So I'm pretty tired of those answers, so I'm looking for a little bit of something new. I'd like to see what their adaptation plan is, and I'd like them to actually table a climate change plan. Thanks.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Rosemont.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I congratulate and thank my colleague for Halifax for a speech that really deals with the essentials. That is how this government is incapable of managing climate change, incapable of taking concrete action to prevent global warming and the effects it will have. But we have a government that keeps bragging about ensuring sovereignty in the Arctic, and we know full well that climate change will particularly affect the Arctic and the Canadian North. So I'd like to hear my colleague from Halifax tell us what the consequences are of the inaction of the Conservatives on the ecosystems and inhabitants of Canada's North.
Honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question and his own commitment to doing whatever he can in this struggle against climate change. In the North, we have incredible things happening. We have incredible things happening where the ecosystems are changing dramatically. Species are moving north. Invasive species are moving north. We have invasive species across the north where people don't even know how to deal with these new species that are overtaking some of the species that are already there and upsetting that delicate balance. But another thing I want to add to this, yesterday, Barack Obama's, the U.S. President's national security advisor actually said that climate change is one of the greatest security risks that we have. And I think that is important when it comes to things like floods, when it comes to things like famine. But if you look at the North as well, what happens when we don't have that polar ice cap anymore? The North is going to be opened up. And while I'm sure the Conservatives see this as a good thing when it comes to resource extraction or it comes to access to the North, this has extreme security implications and extreme sovereignty implications that we're not talking about. We have no plan for what to do here. We're not talking with other countries around the world about what are the foreign affairs implications here, what are the international security implications here. So it is such a huge issue for the North. It's almost like you can't encapsulate it in one issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.